All right, welcome to FreeCodeCamp. Well, today I'm going to be going over the responsive web design certification. That is the third course, which is to learn CSS colors by building a set of colored markers. There are over 94. There are 94 steps. So starting with one. Usually I get a preview, but it seems like it doesn't want to work today. All right, anyway, let's start coding. At the end, I'm sure we'll find out what the preview looks like. Let me see if I restart it. It would help. No. Okay. All right. It says, step one, as you've seen in the previous projects, web pages should start with the doc type, HTML, declaration, followed by an HTML element. Add a doc type element, HTML declaration, at the top of the document, and an HTML element after that. Give the HTML element line attribute and then ENS its value. So basically what it's asking us to do this. And then we have HTML. Whoop, it's an element. HTML. Well, I'll just keep it as this. And closing tag. And then lang equals en. Oh, let's see. Oh, there's an exclamation mark over here, I believe. There we go. There we go. All right. Next, a head element within the HTML element. Just after the head element, add a body element. So we are going to have a head element and then body. Remember that the title element gives you gives search engines extra information about the page. It also displays the content of that title element in two more ways. Now, in the title bar, when the page is open, that is, you would see, as you can see as an example over here, we have learn CSS colors by building. So that would be the title. Whatever information you put over there, that it appears over there. Also, it says in the browser tab for the page, when you hover on it, there you go. And even if that tab is not active, once you hover on the tab, the title text is displayed. All right. Now within the head element, we are going to put the element title, and then this goes right in between the title. All right. Now, again, don't forget to support FreeCodeCamp if you can. I think the resources are pretty cool. All right. Moving on to, and let me zoom in a little bit. I think this is better. All right. Now the char set attribute specifies the character encoding used by the document. UTF-8, that's Unicode transformation format 8-bit, is a character encoding standard used for electronic communication. So inside the head element, we are going to have our meta element, which is self-closing, so there's no need to have a closing tag. Nope, char set, sorry. UTF-8. Step 5, you can have multiple meta elements on the web page. Each meta element adds information about the page that cannot be expressed by other HTML elements. Add another meta. I'll put it right just below this. Doesn't matter where you put it. Give it a name attribute set to viewport. So I'm thinking name equals viewport, and a content attribute that is set to width equals device dash width, comma, initial dash scale equals 1.0. Hopefully that works. Yes. Step 6. Now you're ready to start adding content to the page. So within the body, we are going to have an h1 element. And we are going to put within that h1 element CSS colors. 7. In this project, you will work with an external CSS file to style the page. We've already created a styles.css file for you, so we don't have to do it, I guess. I think they mean by this. So we're going to have to create a link within the head element. So let's create, and that's a self-closing. And then we are going to have a rel relationship is what the style sheet, and then our href to the name of the file. That'll be styles.css. All right, step 8. Now that your external CSS file is set up, you can start styling the page. All right, so this is what our example code looks like. Create a new CSS rule that targets h1 elements. So this is going to be an example. They have the p element here, so it's going to be h1. And then text dash align colon center semicolon. And we have our CSS color markers that is centered. Now you add some elements that you'll eventually style into color markers. First, within the body element, add a div element and set its class attribute to container. Make sure the div element is below the h1 element. Okay, so that's right below here. So div, close it, and class, that's the class attribute equals to container. Next, within the div element, so within the div element, add another div element, right? And give it a class of marker. Yep, seems like that's what it's saying. Class equals marker. Yep. 11. It's time to add some color to the marker. Remember that one way to add color to an element is to use a color keyword like black, cyan, or yellow. As a reminder, here's how to target the class FreeCodeCamp. All right, so now let's see. Create a new CSS rule that targets the class marker. So we have the dot method, so dot marker, and background dash color red. Did that do that right? Yes, I did. Step 12, the background color was applied, but since the marker div element has no content in it, it doesn't have any height by default. In your .marker CSS rule, set the height property to 25px and the width starting to see something to 200px. Did I get that right? Yes. 13. Your marker would look better if it was centered on the page. That's true. An easy way to do that is with the margin shorthand property. All right, in the last project, you set the margin area of elements separately with margin top and margin left. The margin shorthand property makes it easy to set multiple margin areas at the same time. Now, to center your marker on the page, set its margin property to auto. This sets the margin top, right, bottom, and left all to auto at the same time. So margin auto, and there we go. 14. Now that you've got one marker centered with color, it's time to add other markers. In the container div, add 2 more div elements and give them each a class marker. So that would mean copy, paste, paste. Yeah. While you have 3 separate marker div elements, they look like one big rectangle. You should add some space between them to make it easier to see each element. With the shorthand margin property, has 2 values. I'm sorry, when the shorthand margin property has 2 values, it sets margin top and margin bottom to the first value, and margin left and right to the second value. In your marker CSS rule, set the margin property to 10px auto. So that'll be 10px. There we go. To give the markers different colors, you would need to add a unique class to each one. Multiple classes can be added to an element by listing them in the class attribute and separating them with a space. For example, the following adds both the animal and dog classes to a div element. Okay, if you add multiple classes to an HTML element, the styles of the first classes you list may be overridden by the later classes. So to begin, add class 1 to the first marker development. Alright, so there you go. Next, remove the background color property and its value from the then create a new CSS rule that targets class 1. So that's a dot 1 and background color red. Add 2 to the second div and 3 to the third. Create a CSS rule that targets the class 2. It's basically the same thing over here that I did, I believe. So I'll just copy and paste it. So, yep. So it says Christian background color green. So here instead it's 2, and the color is going to be green. Then do the same for 3. Color is blue. And 3. '21. There are 2 main color models: the additive RGB model used in electronic devices, and subtractive CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow, black model used in print. In this project, you work with the RGB model. This means that colors begin as black and changes different levels of red, green, and blue are introduced. All right, so we are going to create a new CSS rule that targets the class container. And sets its background color to RGB 0,0,0. A function is a piece of code that can take an input and perform a specific action. The CSS RGB function assets values or arguments for RGB and produces a color. Alright, so basically this is what we just did in the last step. Now, what we are going to do is each red, green, and blue value is a number from 0 to 255. So that would mean that each one over here, 0 to 255, 0 means that there's 0% of that color and is black. And then there's 255 means that there's 100% of that color. In the .1 CSS rule, replace the color keyword red with the RGB function. For the RGB function, set the value for the red to 255, because the first one is actually, so let's see, RGB, this would be 255 comma 0 comma 0. There we go. Step 23. Let's see. Now I'm going to do the same for the next two. So in the two CSS rule, same thing. Let's remove this. RGB. And what are the values? Okay, so it's red, green, and blue. It's going to be 0 comma 255 comma 0. Max value for green, so, and then this is going to be the same RGB 0 comma 0 comma 255. There you go. All right, step 24. Now it says, while the red and blue markers look the same, the green one is much lighter than it was before. This is because the green color keyword is actually a darker shade, and it's about halfway between black and the maximum value for green. All right, so that explains that. In the .2 CSS rule, set the green value in the RGB function to 127 instead of the 255, just to lower its intensity. 127. There we go. 25. Now add a little more vertical space between your markers and the edge of the container element they're in. In the .container CSS rule, use the shorthand pattern property and add 10 px or 10 pixels. Hold on, pattern property to add 10 px of top and bottom pattern and set the left and right hand pattern to 0. This works similarly to the shorthand margin property you used earlier. Okay, let's see if I can remember this. I think it's something like that. Yes. In the additive RGB color model, primary colors are colors that, when combined, create pure white. But for this to happen, each color needs to be at its highest intensity. Before you combine colors, set your green marker back to pure green for the RGB function in the, set the green back to the max. Okay. Now that you have the primary RGB colors, it's time to combine them. For the RGB function in the .container rule, set the red and green values to the max. Red, green, and blue. So that's 255. Oops. 255. 255. Secondary colors are the colors you get when you combine primary colors. You might have noticed some secondary colors in the last step as you change the RGB values to create the first secondary color yellow. To create the first secondary color yellow, update the RGB function in the .1 rule to combine pure red and pure green. All right, let's see. There you go. Sometimes when you click on it, it takes a second before it actually takes you to the next page. To create the next secondary color, cyan, update the RGB function in the .2 CSS rule to combine pure green and pure blue. All right. To create the final secondary color, magenta, update the RGB function in the .3, so that's going to be red and blue. Step 31. Now that you are familiar with secondary colors, you learn how to create tertiary colors. Tertiary colors, are created by combining a primary with a nearby secondary color. To create a tertiary color orange, update the RGB function in the .1 CSS rule so that red is at the max value and set green to 127. There we go. Whoa. There we go. 32. Same process to create a tertiary color, spring green, combine sign with green. And how do we do that? All right, so here for step 32, to create the tertiary color spring green, combine sign with green. So we're going to update the RGB function in the .2 CSS rule so the green is at the max value. So that'll be green, 255. And we're going to set blue to 127. Let's see. Oh. All right, so green is at the highest, blue is at 127, and 0. Let's see if this works. There we go. 33. And to create a tertiary color violet, okay, so in the .3, what we're going to do, blue should be at the highest, so that's RGB, so blue, highest, and red, 127. There are 3 more tertiary colors that we need to combine and find. All right, so to create the very first one, it says CSS rule so that red, so this would be in the .1, red needs to be at 127, and set green to the max value. And I think that's it for that. And then for 2, green should be at 127 and blue max. The last one, blue is at 127 and red is at the max. $35. Now that you've gone through all the primary, secondary, and tertiary colors on the color wheel, it'll be easier to understand other color theory concepts and how they impact design. So first, in the CSS rule 1, 2, 3, adjust the values in the RGB function so that the background color of each element is set to pure black. Remember that the RGB function uses additive color model where colors start as black and change as the values of red, green, and blue increases. Okay, so if I remember right, I think this should be it. Let's see if I got this. Yes. All right. 36. A color wheel is a circle where similar colors or hues are near each other. So let's see. So talking about contemporary colors. So in the RGB function for the .1 CSS rule, set the red value to the max of 255 to produce pure red. So .1 255. Okay. And then 2, set the green to max. Oh, set the values of green and blue. Sorry, should have finished reading that. There we go. Notice that the red and cyan colors are very bright next to each other. All right, let's see, what do they want us to do? First, in the H1 rule, use the RGB function to set its background color. Cyan. Okay, so let's see. Background. Oh, color. RGB 0,255, 255. All right. Now, next, in .1 CSS rule, use the RGB function to set the background color to black. And in 2, to red. Notice how your eyes are naturally drawn to the red color in the center. When designing a site, you can use this effect to draw attention to important headings, buttons, or links. There are several other important color combinations outside of complementary colors, but you'll learn those a bit later. For now, use the RGB function in the .2 CSS rule to set the background color to black. Step 40. In the H1 CSS rule, remove the background color property value to go back to the default white color. All right. So step 41. Now it's time to add other details to the markers, starting with the first one. In the first marker, development, change the class 1 to red. So instead of 1, we're going to have red, not all red. Let's see. All right, moving on to step 42. Sometimes when you click on it, it doesn't respond right away. Let's try that again. There we go. Now, update the .1 CSS rule to target the new red class. So instead of 1 here, red. There you go. 43. Update the RGB function in the .red CSS rule so that red value is set to max. All right. Moving on. Step 43. No. Still waiting. All right, step 44. Next, change the class 2 to green, and then the next one is to blue. So green, blue. All right, and we are going to do the same over here. Green, and then blue. There we go. Step 46. A very common way to apply color to an element with CSS is with hexadecimal or hex values. While hex values sound complicated, they're really just another form of RGB values. Hex color values start with the hash character and take 6 characters from 0 to 9 and A to F. The first pair of characters represent red, the second pair represent green, and the third pair represents blue. For example, so you have your first, second right here, and then you have your third pair, the 2020. So in the dot green class selector, set the background color property to a hex color code with the values 00 for red, FF for green, and 00 for blue. So we are going to remove our RGB, start with a hash character 00, FF 00. Right, so that's for the green. And as we can see, it's red, green, and then blue. Same thing, red, green, and then blue. Now, you may already be familiar with decimal or base 10 values, which go from 0 to 9. Hexadecimal base 16 values, again, go from 0 to 9, and then A to F. Here's an example code. Here's an example code 0, 1, etc. So basically what we just read over there. Now, with hex colors, 00 is 0% of that color, and FF is basically 100%. So this basically translates to 0 for red, 100% for green, and 0 for blue. And this is the same as RGB 02550, as we did previously. Now we're going to lower the intensity of the green by setting the green value of the hex color to 7F instead of FF. There we go. There we go. So this reminds me to a previous step that we did, which was 127 for RGB. All right. Now the HSL color model, or hue, saturation, and lightness, is another way to represent colors. The CSS HSL function accepts 3 values: a number from 0 to 360 for hue, a percentage from 0 to 100 for saturation, and a percentage of 0 to 100 for lightness. So H, hue, 0 to 360. We have the S for saturation, 0 to 100, and lightness, 0 to 100. Now, if you imagine a color wheel, the hue red is at 0 degrees, green is at 120 degrees, and blue is at 240 degrees. Saturation is the intensity of a color from 0% or gray to 100% for pure color. You must add the percent sign to the saturation and lightness values. Now, lightness is how bright a color appears from 0% or complete black to 100%. Complete white with 50% being neutral. Now, in the dot blue CSS value, we're going to use the HSL, hue, saturation, lightness function to change the background color property to pure blue. Now, we are going to set the hue. All right, so we're going to set the hue to, now hopefully this is right. I'm not 100% sure, but let's try it anyway. Set the hue to 240 and 100%, comma 50%. There we go. Now, you've learned a few ways to set flat colors in CSS, but you can also use a color transition or gradient on an element. A gradient is when one color transitions into another. The CSS linear gradient function lets you control the direction of the transition along the line and which colors are used. So one thing to remember is that the linear gradient function actually creates an image element and is usually paired with the background property, which can accept an image as a value. So within the .red CSS rule, we're going to change the background property to background instead of background color. All right, so background, and I think that's it. All right, so now the linear gradient function is very flexible. Here's a basic syntax of what it looks like. So you have it looks like a function also. So linear gradient, and then you have the direction, and then the colors. All right, now gradient direction is the direction of the line used for the transition. So color 1, 2 are color arguments, which are the colors that will be used in the transition itself. These can be any type of color, including color keywords, keywords, hex, RGB, or hue, saturation, lightness, HSL. Now you apply red to green gradient along a 90-degree line to the first marker. So going back to this, in that red CSS rule, set the background property to linear dash gradient, and then pass it the value of 90 degrees, 9 deg, as the gradient direction. Okay, I think that's it. Yep, that's it. 51. Now, so you use the RGB function for the colors of these gradients. In the linear gradient function, use RGB function to set the first color argument to pure red. So if I remember right, this is going to be 255, comma 0, comma 0. Let's see, did I get that right? Nope, I did not. Okay, so this is supposed to also be in function. So RGB, there we go, like that. So it's a function within a function. 52. You won't see gradient yet because the linear gradient function needs at least 2 color arguments to work. In the same linear gradient function, use the RGB function to set the second color argument to pure green. So I'm thinking what they're referring to is this. RGB and pure green, so 0, comma 255, comma 0. There we go. 2 functions within a function. 53. As you can see, the linear gradient function produces a smooth red-green gradient. While the linear gradient function needs a minimum of 2 color arguments to work, it can accept many arguments. Use the RGB function to add pure blue as the third color. So comma RGB 0, comma 0, comma 255. There we go. 54. Color stops allow you to fine-tune where colors are placed along the gradient line. They are a length unit like px or pixels or percentages that follow color in the linear gradient function. For example, in this red-black gradient, the transition from red to black takes place at the 90% point along the gradient line. So red takes up most of the available space. So in the linear gradient function, add a 75% color stop after the first red color argument. Do not add color stops to the other colors. So basically this will be what, 75%. This was supposed to be for red. Yes, red. There we go. All right, 55. Now that you know the basics of how the linear gradient function and color stops work, you can use them to make the markers look more realistic. So we're going to set the gradient direction to 180. There we go. And next set the color stop for red to be 0%. And that for green to be 50%. And then the other one 100%. Now that the color stops are set, you apply different shades of red to each color argument in the linear gradient function. The shades on the top and bottom edges of the marker will be darker. Okay, so now what we're going to do is for the first color argument, all right, which is currently pure red, update the RGB function so the value of red is 122. And the value of green is 74. And the value of blue is going to be 14. All right. Oh, I made a boo-boo. All right, that's what's going on over here. Let's see our mistake. It says your .red CSS rule should have a background property set to linear gradient. Oh, it's all within the same thing. Okay, sorry. All right, so let me actually reset this so I don't have to redo everything again. So that's actually 122, 74, and then 14. I don't know why I did that in the first place, but let's go. All right. Now, now modify the second color argument in the linear gradient function, which is currently pure green. Now update the RGB function so the value for red is 245. So that would be the second one right here. So red is 245, 62, 113. Hopefully I got that right. Yes. 59. Finally, modify the third color argument. So let's see what we're going to have over here. So this is the third color element. And for red, it's 162, 27, 27. The red marker is looking much more realistic. Now you do the same for the green marker using the combination of the linear gradient function and hex colors. In the dot green CSS rule, we're going to change the background color again to just background. There we go. And 61. Now for this marker, you use hex color codes for your gradients. Now let's see. Use the linear gradient function and set gradient direction to so we are going to use linear dash gradient, right? And 180 degrees, comma. And for the first color, we're going to do a hex color. So hex color of 55, 68, 0D for blue. I think that's it. Nope, that was not it. Oh, there you go. There's the mistake. Can't type. Let's see. There you go. 62. For the second color argument, use a hex color code um, of 71 and F5 and 3E. And then, is there a third? There's a third, which is hex color with 11 for red, 6C, and 31. All right, step 64. Now, even without the color stops, you might have noticed that the colors for the green marker transition at the same points as the red marker. The first color is the start 0%, and the second is in the middle, and the last is the at the end, 100% of the gradient line. Now, what we want to do is says the linear gradient function automatically calculates these values for you. Now, the place colors evenly along the gradient line by default. So in the dot red CSS rule, we're going to remove the three color stops from the um, gradient function to clean up the code a little bit. So, all right, so we're going to remove these three color stops. All right, let's see if that was it. Yep, that's it. 65. If no gradient direction argument is provided to the linear gradient function, it arranges colors from top to bottom or along a 180-degree line by default. Now clean up your code a little more by removing the gradient direction arguments from both linear. So we're going to remove this, 180, and and 180 from here. 66. Now you apply a gradient to the blue marker, this time using the HSL function as color arguments. So what we're going to do is change the background color to background. Use the linear gradient function and pass the HSL function with the values 186 for hue, 76 for saturation, and 16 for lightness. All right, so what I think I need to do is linear dash gradient. Oh, not again. There we go. And let's see, 186. Yep, I know I can't type. 186, 76, and 16. Now, as the second color argument, pass the HSL. All right, so we are going to have comma HSL, and we are going to have 223 comma 90% comma 60%. 69. And the third one, we are going to have 240, 240, 56%, comma, and 42%. Well, there shouldn't be any dot here. Let's see. Oh, I know I messed up somewhere. Oh, it's supposed to be a comma, not a dot. Now that the markers have the correct colors, it's time to build the marker sleeves. Start with the red marker. Inside the red marker div, create a new div element and give it a class name sleeve. So we have our div, close it, and our class equals to sleeve. Create a new CSS rule that targets the class sleeve. Okay, so that's going to be that. And set the width to 110px. And we're going to have the height 25px. All right. Now to make the marker look more realistic, give the sleeve a transparent white color. So first, set the sleeve element's background color to white. All right. So background dash color. Many ways to do this. We could either use the RGB method, or we could just say white. There we go. Opacity describes how opaque or non-transparent something is. For example, a solid wall is opaque and no light can pass through, but a drinking glass is much more transparent. Okay, with the CSS opacity property, you can control how opaque or transparent an element is. When the value is 0 or 0%, the element will be completely transparent, and 1 or 100%, the element will be completely opaque. So in the dot sleeve class, we are going to have opacity, and we are going to set it to 0.5. And let's see. There we go. Got it. All right, so moving on to the next one, 74. Another way to set the opacity for an element is with the alpha channel. Similar to the opacity rule, or opacity, however you want to say, The alpha channel controls how transparent or opaque a color is. You've already set sleeves opacity with a named color and the opacity property, but you can add an alpha channel to that other CSS color property. So inside that sleeve, we're going to remove the opacity property and value. So I want to remove this. Let's see. All right. Since you're already familiar with using the RGB function to set colors, to add an alpha channel to an RGB color, use the RGBA function instead. Again, this is to an alpha channel. So the RGBA function works just like an RGB function, but takes one more number that is from 0 to 1.0 for the alpha channel. So it looks like this: red value, green value, blue value, and then we have our alpha value. So you can also use an alpha channel with HSL and hex colors. You will see how to do that soon now, okay? So within the sleeve, we're going to create, let's see, for the background color, we are going to have RGBA, and for white, oh, right, and then 50%, 0.5. Let's see. There we go. So that's what that's going to look like. All right. The sleeve is looking good, but it would look even better if it was positioned more toward the right side of the marker. One way to do that is to add another element before the sleeve to push it to the right. So we're going to add a new div with the class cap before the sleeve div elements. So right below over here, div, and class equals to cap. Now it says create a new CSS rule to target the class cap, and a new rule we're going to have width 60 pixels and height is going to be 25 pixels. All right, 78. It looks like your sleeve disappeared, but don't worry, it's still there. What happened is that your new cap div is taking up the entire width of the marker and is pushing the sleeve down to the next line. So this is because the default display property for div elements is block. So when two block elements are next to each other, they stack like actual blocks. For example, your marker elements are all stacked up on top of each other. To position two div elements on the same line, set their display properties to inline. So create a new target, a new rule to target both the cap. So that'll be cap, comma, dot sleeve, and display inline dash block. Step 79. In the last project, you learned a little bit about borders and the border color property. All HTML elements have borders, though they're usually set to none by default. With CSS, you can control all aspects of an element border and set the border on all sides or just one side at a time. For a border to be visible, you need to set its width and style. In the dot sleeve CSS rule, add the border left width property with the value 10px. So border left dash width, all right, 10px. And then step 80. Borders have several styles to choose from. You can make your border a solid line, but you can also use a dash or dotted line if you prefer. So solid border lines are probably the most common. So within our dot sleeve, we're going to have a border dash left dash style, and we're going to have it as solid. And as you can see, we have our solid line right here. 81. Your border should be visible now. If no color is set, black is used by default. But to make your code more readable, it's better to set the border color explicitly. In the dot sleeve CSS rule, border left color. So border dash left dash color property with black. All right. 82. The border left shorthand property lets you to set the left border's width, style, and color at the same time. So as you can see, you have the width. Instead of having border left, width, style, and color, it could all just be in one line. So border left, and then you have your width, style, and color. So we're going to replace all these three that we have over here, all these three, with just the border left. So let's see. Properties with the border left shine. The values of the width of etc. It's going to be the same thing. Okay, so that's going to be the width, and it's going to be comma, style is solid, comma, black. I just don't want to forget it. The values, I don't want to forget the values. That's why I did it that way. Now I can just delete this like that. And solid color. Now I have a weird feeling. There are no commas here, so I don't think I actually need commas here. There we go. Yep, don't need commas. Now, your marker is looking good, but to make it even look more realistic, you can change the border style to double solid borders. For the border left shorthand property, change the border style value from solid to double. Look at that. The black color of your border looks pretty harsh against the more transparent sleeve. That is true. You can use the alpha channel to lower the opacity of the black border. Now for the border left shorthand property, use the RGB function to set the color value to pure black with the 75% opacity. So instead of this, we're going to have RGBA, right? And this is black, so 0, 0, 0, 0.75. Basically 75%. 85. Awesome. Your red marker is looking good. Now all you need to do is add the caps and sleeves to your other markers. Add a cap and sleeve to both the green and blue markers. You can just copy the div element from the red marker and paste them into the other two. So let's look at this. So right here, so copy, Control C to copy, and then right beneath it, paste, and then right beneath this one, paste. And that should be it. 86. The last thing you do is add a slight shadow to each marker to make them look even more realistic. The box shadow property lets you apply one or more shadows around an element. Now here's the basic syntax. So you have the box shadow and you have offset on the X and the Y and then the color. Here's how the offset X and Y values work. So both offset X and Y accept number values in pixel or px and other CSS units. So a positive offset X value moves the shadow right, and a negative moves it to what? Left. And a positive, of course, shadow value moves the shadow down, and a negative value moves it up. If you want a value of 0 for any of both offset X and Y, you don't need to add a unit. Every browser understands that 0 means no change. Now, the height and width of the shadow is determined by the height and width of the element it's applied to. You can also use an optional spread radius value to spread out the reach of the shadow. That's going to be described more later on. Start by adding a simple shadow to the red marker. So we have our red marker over here. So in the CSS rule or red rule, add a box shadow property. So box shadow, and then let's look at the syntax again. So offset X. So that'll be 5px, right? And 5px for offset Y, comma, and then red. Hopefully I did that right. I'm not seeing anything. Nope. Oh, no commas. I am so used to adding commas. There we go. So we have our red background. All right, 87. As you can see, you added a simple red shadow around your marker. That's 5 pixels to the right and 5 pixels down. All right. But what if you wanted to position your shadow on the opposite side? You can do that by using the negative values. All right, so update the values for the box shadow property set to negative, negative for both. So we just add a negative. All right, 88. Notice that the edges of they're too sharp, as you can see. This is because there is an optional blur radius value for the box shadow property. So this is the new syntax: offset X, offset Y, blur radius, and then you have the color. So if a blur radius value isn't given, its default is 0 and produces sharp edges. The higher the value of the radius, the greater the blur effect. So in the dot green, we're going to have a box shadow. And let's see, 5px, 5px. And then we're going to have a blur radius, and then 5px for the blur radius, and then green. Well, all right, nice. 89. But what if you wanted to expand the shadow out further? You can do or use the optional spread radius. So that's the next thing. That's the syntax, and that's the next value over here. So offset X, Y, blur radius, spread radius, and then color. So for the blue, and I don't think I'm going to be typing this again. Copy, and for the blue, paste. But instead of green, we're going to have blue. And what else? So it's 0 actually. 0 for this. 0 for this. And blur radius 5px. Oh no, and 0 for even the blur radius. And then we have 5px. Okay. There we go. 90. Now that you're familiar with the box shadow property, you can finalize the shadow starting with the 1 for the red marker. So within the red one, well, we have a box. We're going to update this, and the offset X is going to be 0, and this is also 0, and 0px, and we have, oh no, it's actually 20px, and then 0 px, and the color is red. There we go. Next, update the color value of the red marker's box shadow property. Replace the named color with the RGBA. So RGBA and 83 for red, 14, and 14, and 0.8. All right, we're going to update this one too. 0, 0, 20px, 20px, and we have for the spread radius 0, and leave the colors as green, blue, red for now. That's interesting. Alright, the shadows with the green and blue mark have the same position, but the only difference would be the colors. Oh, sorry. Okay, so I get it now. $20px 0. There we go. Alright, those are the changes. There you go. For the green markers box shadow property, replace the named color with the hex color code. Alright. What a hex color code of 3B 7E 20 and CC. Hopefully I did that right. Oh, I did. Nice. I wasn't sure about the alpha channel. All right. And the last step, 94. Finally, for the blue markers, box shadow property, replace the named color with the HSLA. Makes sense. HSLA and 223, 59%, 31%, and 0.8. Yep. 223, 59, 31, comma, and then I forget the comma. There we go. And we are done. So we are done with the CSS colors by building a set of colored markers. 94 steps, but we're done.